Yes, it is I, Tentus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue our discussion on Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, the second edition of AD&D. When I left off, we were diving deep into combat, and of course talking about these special defenses your characters and your monsters may have. And of course I'm talking about them as if you were the DM yourself, or perhaps maybe you as a player need to know a little bit about this. So, let's talk about weapon immunity. This is the immunity that a creature might have, it's going to be a monster, that a normal attack, normal weapon, isn't going to do anything to them. You're going to need some kind of special attack in order to deal them damage. Now, each creature will individually tell you what kind of attack this is going to be. What kind of attack do I need to do against this creature to actually damage it? If I have the appropriate attack, I'm dealing damage to it. Granted, if I have a more powerful attack, let's say if it's a type of magic weapon, maybe I'll need a +1. If I have a +3, it counts. More powerful counts. It counts to overcome it. This does not grant spell immunity. Spell immunity is an entirely separate thing. This just means, spells are going to affect it normally. And also it means if you hit something with a weapon it would be immune to, it's still going to take some kind of wound, just isn't going to take any kind of damage. The wound is going to be superficial. Now let's talk about some specific types. Silver. Silver applies to things like werewolves, vampires, and some other undead. For silver, you do not want a silver-plated weapon. It's not going to do it. You need it to have an actual silver blade, or whatever appropriate part you're going to hit whatever you're fighting with. Gotta be silver. This, unfortunately, comes up with a different problem. A silver weapon is just not efficient in combat. It bends, it breaks. You can use it for those limited times to fight these certain creatures. But as a normal combat weapon, it's not going to be effective. You're just going to have to keep it for that time when you really need it to bop a werewolf or something similar. Now let's say two creatures that each have weapon immunity fighting each other. What happens then? We have to look at a few things. What level are each of their weapon immunities on? And then we have to look to how much hit dice do each creature have? What effectively the creature can overcome of an opponent's weapon immunity is based upon their hit dice. Effectively, they would have a plus blank weapon in their fists or claws or teeth. Granted, this does not mean they actually have a plus whatever, whether it's +1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. It means they would count as it for overcoming the weapon immunity of another creature. So if I have this amount of hit dice, maybe I'm +3, I would compare it to my opponent. If my opponent only has +3 weapon immunity, bam, I'm hitting it. Now granted, if my opponent maybe only has the ability to do +2 weapon immunity with its hit dice, and I have at least +3 like it does, can't damage me. So see, that's the comparison. You compare the two of them, you see how their immunities stack up, and how each of their abilities to overcome another's immunity stacks up. And then you can see how they kind of battle it out. Now, use these creatures sparingly. Rarely is the best way to say it. If you want to use a creature with weapon immunity, make sure at least 2 of your members have actual weapons which can overcome that. That's the suggestion. Spells count for great, but spells run out. Spells might not be the appropriate ones to fight a creature like this. Wizards and priests can memorize spells which have nothing to do with combat. Granted, that's why you need people with weapons that are going to overcome it. And I'm saying minimum 2, because that's the average. It's half your team if you're doing a party of 4, or at least a good chunk of it. The real reason is you don't want to rely on just one person for this fight. You want everyone to be involved. You want it to be at least a good chunk of people involved. Even if you can't get everyone because of the immunity, enough that it seems like these people aren't completely out of it. Now, again, it is completely up to you as DM. When you actually use it, you could use it as much as you'd like. Maybe you have a story point that you want to use a werewolf for that your people aren't really prepared for, or a vampire, or something else that you're bringing it into the story. Then that's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine to use them as much as you want technically. It's just a suggestion to be careful with it, because you don't want to aggravate your team, and you don't want to slaughter them if they can't damage it. Now let's move on and talk about morale. Doesn't really affect PCs. I'll talk about that in a second. But it affects NPCs and monsters. It's the ability as PCs have to drive them away, to have them fail their morale and retreat. Now, as I was saying, for PCs, it's up to the player. The player's going to determine what their character is going to do. So if they don't want them to run away, they're not. Granted, if a DM gets control of that player through charm or some other effect, then yeah, they could have them run away, but normally, no. Now, the DM can give suggestions to morale. That's fine. I mean, come on. They can suggest things all they want and give certain circumstances that make sense for it. They're going to say it then. Now, when we come to morale for monsters and NPCs, that's when your DM's really going to start determining what's going to happen for these. Your DM has two options. They can use the role-playing method or the rolling method. The role-playing method says, I look at my type of creature. Let's say it's an animal or unintelligent. Well, we know that they go after people when they are hungry and they don't have anything else to eat, or they're defending a lair. More than likely, they're just not going to bother with people if they don't have a chance to. I mean, it's circumstantial. If you fight them and they get injured, they're going to run away. They're not fighting to the death. Not very often. That's the general rule for the unintelligent animal creatures. Fighting to the death does occur. It's just rare and very circumstantial and more than likely story-driven if you, as the DM, are adding it in. Other than that, you're just going to run away. Intelligent creatures. Well, they are going to be very circumstantial themselves. It's going to depend upon their personalities. And the creature itself is the type of creature that it is. Do they normally fight to the death? How much damage do they have to take to run away? How do they react to certain circumstances? You ask these questions and you figure out what kind of morale this creature would have. How it would react to the circumstances that are occurring around it. And you're just going to be, it's going to run away. It's going to fight to the death. You'll determine it using that. And though it also does depend on the individual creature. If I'm using Orc A, and I know orcs are going to, in this circumstance, might fight to the death. Maybe Orc A, maybe he doesn't do it. Maybe for some reason, he's not up for fighting to the death. And I know that because of the storyline. He'll run away then. Now, there's the option of rolling. And you might ask, with what I just talked about, why roll? When you have a lot of creatures to manage as a GM, good point to roll. Or when morale might come up a lot, other good point to roll. Is that points in time where that kind of intersects? Then yeah, as DM, I'm going to be like, rolling's easier. So you look to a few things. You first look, one, the chart of things that cause you to roll morale. You don't have to use all of them. You just look and you can see what's appropriate for the circumstance that your creature might be running away. You figure it out, and that's your first thing. You know, it's like, oh, it's running away. Again, very circumstantial. Most of these, yeah, you can just use them. Some of them, circumstance might allow you to ignore them. Others just might not apply. You choose the one that it makes sense for why you're rolling at this time. Then you look to the creature. The creature is going to be a certain general type, have a certain amount of hit dice. There's a chart in the book that will tell you what kind of morale it has. This will give you an important number to remember, a difficulty number that you have to sort of meet. This is the difficulty number that's your sort of target. I'll explain what that means. So, I have my number because I know my type of creature, I know my hit dice, got that. Let's look to the actual morale check. Modifiers. Circumstances always change in the course of battle. It modifies ranged attacks, modifies AC, modifies morale. There's another chart in the book that tells you all these morale modifications. You look at them, you apply any that are appropriate. Now it's time to roll. 2d10. The object is to get equal to or less than my target number. So regardless of how I'm modified, whenever I roll in that 2d10, lower than that. If I get higher than that, I failed it. Lower than that, I'm staying around, ready to battle more. Higher than that, I'm ready to run away. You know, it's they are ready to retreat from battle. And they're going to as best they can. Now granted, if you corner any of these things, from animals to intelligent creatures, they're going to fight back. I mean, they're going to try to escape as best they can, and they're ready to bare their fangs, so to say, against you and fight back if they can't get an opportunity or don't see one to escape. Now, if it's intelligent, it might surrender. It will not surrender if it doesn't think it will survive by doing so. It has to get a feeling that, oh, people might spare me if I surrender. But yeah, it's going to. But if it doesn't think it will live, if it surrenders to you, it's just going to try to either keep fighting you or run away. Whatever seems more feasible. More than often, of course, it's going to be running away. It's failed its morale. It wants to just get out of there. But if things seem cut off, it's just going to fight. So let's talk about damage. Over the course of a character's career, no matter how lucky you are, no matter how much you avoid battle, you're going to take damage. Damage is representing sort of physical wear and tear and mental wear and tear to your overall character. It subtracts from your HP. The more hit points you have, the harder you are to drop. The harder you are to hit enough with enough wounds to drop down, to take enough damage. Of course, you will keep taking damage until you run out of hit points, or you heal it up. You remove that damage from your character. Whichever happens first is going to determine how your character reacts to said damage. But know this, when we're talking about damage, we're talking about hitting the character or creature as a whole. Even if my GM says, you get stabbed in the arm, or you get clubbed in the head, or anything like that, that adds flavor to the battle as it stands. It's not going to specifically affect your arm, or specifically hit your head. Normally it's going to affect you as a whole. Because there's so many different monsters and creatures and players out there, everything is unified under one system to make it just easy to take care of. So any damage is applied to you as a whole. Now when we talk about damage, it's traditionally done in some kind of dice roll. This is normally represented by a spell or something like a weapon. For weapons, you could roll a d8 and do a d8 damage. Now, this will be modified by a certain number of things. You might have a d8 plus 3. This would have been caused by high strength. I might have really high strength, and therefore add more damage to my attack. It could be a magic weapon. Hey, adds damage to my attack. There could be some other kind of special ability that's affecting my weapon, making me deal more damage, making it more fierce. I could be more fierce attacks if I'm some kind of monster with big claws. More damage. These things add together to a modifier that is added to your dice. You can, of course, also multiply that dice. This might be something like a backstab. Backstab means I do additional damage if I'm getting them in the back, where they don't suspect it. This is represented by multiplication, like something like times 2. Now, if I have my d8 and it's telling me times 2, I'm going to roll that d8 twice. 2d8. Bam. Same dice roll. Bam. It's still one attack, but it's the effective damage of 2 attacks. The modifier, that plus 3 I talked about earlier, does not multiply. So if I'm getting that times 2, it'd be 2d8 plus 3 instead of my normal 1d8 plus 3. That's how it's going to work. So that's it for today. I talked to you about, of course, weapon immunity. Creatures being immune to weapons and not being able to be affected by them, and what it means to try to overcome it. I talked about morale. Driving fear into your enemies and forcing them to retreat from you in the face of your combat prowess. And I talked a little bit about damage. Stuff you take to knock your character down or to stuff you deal to defeat your enemies. Next episode I'm going to talk about special types of damage. Other types of damage that can be dealt to you that you're going to encounter in the course of your adventures. And then I'll talk about healing. Recovering from damage. Getting your body back to full working shape. So if you have any questions, comments, anything you would say, anything you think I left out, please just leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and of course subscribe to support the channel, the Empire, and the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can always check out my Patreon, link in the description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.